In the spring of 1878, a man named Dick Dublin made a mistake that most outlaws in West Texas made only once. He robbed the wrong stagecoach on the wrong road in the wrong county. Within 72 hours, he was dead. No trial, no jail cell, just the Pecos River country doing what it had always done, swallowing men whole and leaving very little behind to explain what happened. That wasn't unusual. Not out here. West Texas has always looked like the end of something. The end of civilization. The end of the map. The end of the kind of law that required paperwork and witnesses and a judge who showed up sober. To outlaws in the late 1800s, that looked like opportunity. Wide open land, scattered ranches, 100 miles between towns. If you could ride fast and disappear into the draws and canyons of the Trans-Pecos, who was going to stop you? The answer, it turned out, was almost everyone. Because the same isolation that attracted outlaws also produced something else entirely. A culture of frontier justice, so swift, so personal, and so final that West Texas became one of the most dangerous places on the continent to be on the wrong side of the law. Not because the law was strong, but because out here, when the law wasn't enough, men handled it themselves. And they were very good at it. To understand why West Texas became a killing ground for outlaws, you have to understand the land itself. West of the Pecos River, the terrain breaks apart into something almost otherworldly. Volcanic mountain ranges rise out of flat desert basins. Canyons cut deep and sudden into limestone plateaus. Water sources are days apart. Summer temperatures push past 110 degrees, and blue northers in winter can drop the temperature 40 degrees in an hour. This is the Chihuahuan Desert, the largest desert in North America, and it does not care about you. In the 1870s and 1880s, this region was also the last major refuge of the Comanche and Apache, the endpoint of the goodnight-loving cattle trail, and the corridor through which rustlers, killers, and fugitives moved between Texas and Mexico. The border was porous and largely theoretical. A man wanted in Texas could be in Chihuahua in 2 days. A man wanted in New Mexico could disappear into the Big Bend country and never be heard from again. That made West Texas a pressure valve for the entire Southwest criminal world, and that made it extraordinarily violent. Between 1875 and 1900, historians estimate that more gunfights, lynchings, and summary executions occurred per capita in the Trans-Pecos region than almost anywhere else in the American West. The numbers are imprecise because many deaths simply went unrecorded. Men vanished into the desert and were never reported missing because there was no one to report to. The official response to this violence was the Texas Rangers. The Rangers have been operating in various forms since the Republic of Texas era, but it was the Frontier Battalion, formed in 1874, that brought organized force into West Texas for the first time. Companies of Rangers rode into the Trans-Pecos with a simple mandate: restore order. What that meant in practice was often brutal and extrajudicial, but it was effective. Ranger Captain June Peak, and later Captain George Baylor, pushed deep into the Davis Mountains and the Big Bend, running down rustlers and killers who had assumed the country would protect them. What they found instead was that the Rangers were willing to follow them anywhere, and willing to shoot first when the situation called for it. But the Rangers alone didn't make West Texas deadly for outlaws. The ranchers did. The great cattle operations that moved into West Texas in the late 1870s, outfits like the Blocker Brothers, the Hashknife, and the massive Pecos Valley operations, had no patience for rustlers and even less interest in the court system. A stolen herd meant financial ruin. A dead cowhand meant a funeral with no one to answer for it. These men hired their own enforcers, formed vigilance committees, and made it clear through action rather than words that theft in their territory carried a death sentence. The most famous of these responses was the rise of what locals simply called the rope. Vigilante hangings in West Texas were not rare events whispered about in shame. They were public, deliberate, and meant to be seen. A body left hanging at a water crossing sent a message that traveled faster than any newspaper. Consider the fate of the Jesse Evans gang. Evans had ridden with Billy the Kid in New Mexico and fancied himself untouchable. He moved his operation into West Texas in 1880, running stolen horses across the Pecos and robbing at will through Presidio and Pecos counties. He was wrong about being untouchable. Texas Rangers cornered Evans and his men near Presidio on July 3, 1880, and in the gunfight that followed, Evans shot and killed Ranger George Bingham before the gang was finally forced to surrender. Evans was sentenced to 10 years in Huntsville. He escaped from a work detail in May 1882 and was never officially heard from again. Most historians believe he died somewhere in the Trans-Pecos, identity unknown, unreported. Then there was the Pecos War. In the early 1890s, a simmering conflict between competing cattle interests in Reeves County exploded into open violence. The Frazier-Miller feud, as it became known, left bodies on the streets of Pecos in broad daylight. Barney Kemp Riggs, a man who had already killed in Arizona and survived a prison term, became a central figure in the violence, shooting down enemies in saloons and on the streets of Pecos. The feud lasted years, wound through multiple trials, and ended not with justice, but with exhaustion. The last principals either died violently or drifted away. No clean resolution, just silence. Then there were the Ketchum brothers. Tom and Sam Ketchum were West Texas boys, born in San Saba County, raised on ranches, and perfectly comfortable with the Trans-Pecos terrain. By the 1890s, they had turned that familiarity into a criminal operation, robbing trains across West Texas and the Southwest with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Tom robbed a Southern Pacific train near Comstock in 1898, then another near Stanton. The Rangers and railroad detectives were on their trail constantly, but the brothers knew the country too well. The arrogance eventually caught up with them. Sam was wounded and captured after a botched robbery in New Mexico in 1899, and died in prison weeks later. Tom, not knowing his brother was dead, attempted to rob the same train at the same location by himself. The conductor shot him with a shotgun, nearly severing his arm. He was found the next morning, too weak to move, sitting beside the tracks, waiting to be arrested. He was hanged in 1901. The execution was botched. The rope was too long. Tom Ketchum was decapitated. His last words were, "Goodbye. Please dig my grave very deep. All right. Hurry up." The case was closed. By the turn of the 20th century, something had shifted in West Texas. The railroads were the catalyst. The Southern Pacific through the southern route and the Texas and Pacific through the northern corridor brought with them something the land had never had before: connection. Towns grew up around the depots. Sheriffs had telegraph wires. Judges arrived and stayed. The cattle empires consolidated or collapsed, and the wild in-between spaces that outlaws had depended on began to close. The Rangers were reorganized and professionalized. The border, while never fully controlled, saw increased federal attention. The great rustling networks that had fed on the chaos of the open range era found their operating environment shrinking. And perhaps most importantly, the population itself changed. Farmers moved in. Families put down roots. The culture of a place changes when children are present, when there are schools and churches and the ordinary machinery of settled life. The men who had thrived in the violence of the frontier era found fewer and fewer places to stand. The last major outlaw shootout in the Trans-Pecos occurred in 1918. By then it was already an anachronism, a remnant of something that had died slowly and without ceremony, the way most things die in the desert. West Texas didn't become the deadliest place in America for outlaws because it had the best law enforcement. It didn't. For decades, the law out here was thin and unreliable, and sometimes indistinguishable from the violence it claimed to oppose. It became deadly because the land itself was unforgiving, because the people who chose to live there were self-reliant in ways that made them dangerous, and because the code that governed conduct on the frontier had no tolerance for predators. When you rob from men who have nothing to fall back on but themselves, you discover very quickly that they will come after you with everything they have. The outlaws who came to West Texas looking for easy pickings found something they hadn't expected. Not weakness, not emptiness. A place that had already decided, long before they arrived, exactly what it was going to do with people like them. If you made it this far without getting shot, robbed, or swallowed by the Chihuahuan Desert, consider subscribing. New videos on West Texas history drop regularly. The tumbleweed will be here. It always is.